All right, so are you ready to dive into some hypnotherapy and entity removal?
Let's do it.
Okay, great. This video of Calogero Grifasi working with Karen,
hmm
this was pretty wild.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that one for sure.
Yeah, and his whole approach to it was interesting to me. I mean, right off the bat, he says,
Yeah.
"We're not destroying entities, we're helping them move on."
Right, and it's like, where are they moving on to? What are they?
What are they?
Yeah, and what even are they to begin with?
Exactly. He doesn't really define what these entities are.
No, he doesn't.
He seems to maybe think of them as like these energetic beings, like
Yeah, like leftover bits of soul or something.
right, exactly. And he talks about using portals, but I have to admit, when I hear portals, I'm like
Yeah, right.
picturing Stargate.
Totally, yeah.
But obviously he doesn't mean a physical portal.
Right, I think he's just using that as a metaphor. Like he's using visualization and language to guide these entities to a different state of being.
Okay, so he's kind of acting as a spiritual guide
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
for the person under hypnosis, but also for these entities.
For everyone involved, really.
So how does this actually play out in the session with Karen?
Well, he starts by taking her back to a memory from her childhood.
Okay.
She was like terrified during a thunderstorm.
Oh, yeah. Thunderstorms can be pretty scary.
Yeah, for sure. Especially as a kid. But he doesn't just have her analyze the memory. He has her visualize being back in that moment, that she's actually there.
That's interesting. So it's not just remembering, it's like re-experiencing it.
Exactly. And maybe that's a key part of the process, allowing her to actually feel those emotions again, but in a safe environment.
It's like giving her a chance to rewrite the script.
Exactly.
So speaking of rewriting scripts, things get pretty interesting when he helps her uncover these two entities that are attached to her, these conjoined twin men.
Oh, yeah. Conjoined twin men.
Now that's a new one.
Yeah. And it's weird because they died as infants, but she sees them as adults.
That is strange. Why do you think that is?
Well, he doesn't really explain that in the video, but maybe it's like her subconscious trying to make sense of it somehow.
So maybe it's not meant to be taken literally.
Right. Maybe it's more symbolic or metaphorical.
So what are these twins all about? Are they malevolent?
Not really. It doesn't seem like they're intentionally trying to harm her, but they are carrying a lot of emotional baggage.
Okay.
One is filled with anger. The other one's filled with sadness.
Yeah, they did die pretty young, only 6 months old.
Yeah. So maybe they never got a chance to process those emotions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's possible they're just drawn to her energy,
Yeah.
seeking some kind of resolution or solace.
So their presence could still be affecting her, even if they're not trying to?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're all energetic beings. We're constantly interacting with energy, whether we realize it or not.
Right.
So even if they're not consciously trying to harm her, their unresolved emotions could still be influencing her on a subtle level.
So how does he approach the situation with the twins?
Well, he has her interact with them. Yeah, he guides her to help them release their anger and sadness. It's kind of like he's facilitating a conversation.
Wow. That seems like it would take a lot of skill.
It does. Yeah, he has to be very careful not to lead them in any particular direction,
Right.
but just create a safe space for them to communicate and find some resolution.
So does he actually succeed in helping them move on?
He does, but there's a twist.
Oh, there's always a twist.
He uncovers this other entity, this powerful demonic entity named Kharike.
A demonic entity, now we're talking.
Right.
That sounds intense.
Yeah, and it's attached to the angrier twin.
Okay, so maybe the twins' anger wasn't entirely his own.
Right, maybe Kharike was feeding off of that negative energy, amplifying it.
So what does he do about this Kharike?
Same approach. Compassion, understanding. He helps Karen understand Kharike's influence.
Okay.
And then guides her to disconnect from it. But the really freaky part is how Kharike got attached to Karen in the first place.
Okay. Okay, how did that happen?
While she was still in the womb.
Oh.
Her mother was having a stressful dream, and it seems Kharike used that as an opportunity to connect.
That's kind of creepy. It makes you wonder how much our mother's emotional states affect us even before we're born.
Yeah, that's a whole other rabbit hole we could go down.
Right, but how does he disconnect this Kharike?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. He helps Karen rewrite the past.
Rewrite the past. What do you mean by that?
He basically guides her to change the energy of that moment when Kharike first attached itself to her.
So by changing her perception of the event, he's essentially closing off that entry point.
Exactly. It's like closing a door that was left ajar.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
It is,
Yeah.
right? It makes you think, what other doors might we have left open in our own past?
And that brings us to a really important point. Grifasi talks a lot about the reliability of information in hypnosis.
Right, because it's not all going to be accurate. Right?
Exactly. I mean, memories can be unreliable. Our subconscious can play tricks on us.
Definitely.
So how do we know what to believe? How does he figure out what's real and what's not?
He says he looks for consistency across multiple sessions.
Okay.
So if certain themes or details keep popping up, even in different forms, that's a good indication that there's something significant there.
So he's kind of like a detective.
Yeah, I like that analogy. He's looking for clues, piecing together the evidence.
So even with something as powerful as hypnosis, we still have to be discerning.
We do. And I think that's a valuable lesson in general, not just for hypnotherapy.
Especially in today's world where we're bombarded with information from all sides.
Right. We have to learn to filter, to question, to critically evaluate what we're being told.
And what's interesting is that even with all of this uncertainty, Karen still seems to have benefited from the session.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
She ends the session feeling lighter, more at peace.
And her phone screen even cracked.
Right. She thinks it was from the energy work.
No, whether that's true or not, who knows?
But she definitely felt a shift.
She did. Yeah, it seems like she was able to release some of that negative energy that was attached to her.
And it makes you think, what might we be carrying around without even realizing it? You know, what unseen forces might be at play in our own lives?
It's a question worth asking, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, you know, this is just the beginning. We've only scratched the surface of Grifasi's work. There's so much more to unpack.
Oh, yeah, for sure. This is a deep rabbit hole.
So let's take a deeper dive into these concepts in the next part of our conversation.
Sounds good. I'm ready when you are. Yeah, it really is a rabbit hole, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
This idea that there could be all these, like, unseen forces influencing us.
Yeah.
You know.
Hey, and we wouldn't even know.
Exactly. It's kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it.
It is. Okay, so let's talk more about those conjoined twins for a second.
Quick.
They were attached at the shoulder, right?
Yeah, it's a shoulder.
And it seemed like they were carrying a lot of pain from their own past.
Right. They died so young, just 6 months old.
Yeah.
So they never really had a chance to experience life.
And Grifasi said one was full of anger and the other was full of sadness.
Makes you wonder if that's like a common thing with twins, you know?
Like some kind of energetic connection there.
Could be, yeah. And maybe that's why they were drawn to Karen.
You think they were looking for something from her?
Maybe some kind of solace or resolution?
But even if they weren't trying to harm her directly, being surrounded by that kind of energy couldn't have been good.
Oh, definitely not. You know, our energy affects everything around us.
Right.
It's like if you walk into a room where people are arguing, you can feel the tension, right?
Yeah.
So imagine having these two entities with all their unresolved trauma attached to you.
I bet that would take a toll.
It would. Yeah, it's not surprising that Karen was experiencing some issues.
So how did Grifasi handle that situation?
Well, he did what he always does. He helped them move on.
But how do you move on something like that?
By helping them process their emotions, I think.
So he basically facilitated a conversation between Karen and these twins.
Yeah, something like that. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It is, yeah. It sounds like it would take a lot of skill and sensitivity.
Oh, definitely.
Because you don't want to lead them in any particular direction.
Right. You just want to create a safe space for them to communicate and work things out.
So it's almost like he's acting as a therapist for these entities.
Kind of, yeah. It's like he's helping them heal so they can move on to a better place.
Okay, I can get behind that, but what about that demonic entity, Kharike?
Yeah, that one was a little more intense.
It sounded pretty scary.
It did, yeah. And what's interesting is that it was attached to the angrier twin.
So maybe that anger was being amplified by Kharike?
That's what it seems like. Yeah, like it was feeding off of that negative energy.
Okay, that's pretty disturbing.
It is. But the good news is that Grifasi was able to help Karen disconnect from it.
But how did it get attached to her in the first place?
Okay, so this is where it gets really freaky.
I'm ready.
While Karen was still in the womb,
Seriously?
her mother was having a stressful dream, and it seems like Kharike used that as an opportunity to connect.
So it was like a moment of vulnerability?
Exactly, and Kharike was able to slip in. That is wild. It makes you wonder what else might be going on that we're not aware of.
Right. What other things might we be picking up from our environment?
Or even from our parents.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
But how did Grifasi handle this Kharike situation?
The same way he handles everything else, compassion, understanding.
But how do you disconnect from a demonic entity?
Well, he used this technique where he had Karen rewrite the past.
Okay, now I'm really lost.
He basically helped her change the energy of that moment when Kharike first connected.
So by changing her perception of the event, it's like closing off that entry point.
Right. It's like shutting the door on Kharike.
That's pretty incredible.
It is. Yeah, it makes you wonder what other possibilities are out there. You know?
Right. If we can rewrite the past like that, what else can we do?
Exactly.
But we have to remember that not everything that comes up in hypnosis is going to be accurate.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean, memories are notoriously unreliable.
They are. And our subconscious can play all sorts of tricks on us.
So how do we know what to believe?
Well, Grifasi talks about looking for patterns across multiple sessions.
Okay, so it's not just about taking one session as gospel.
Right. You have to look for consistency.
So if certain things keep coming up, even in slightly different forms, that's a good indication that there's something there.
Exactly. It's like piecing together a puzzle.
Yeah, you're looking for those connecting pieces.
So even with hypnosis, you have to be discerning.
It's not just about blindly accepting everything you hear.
No, you have to use your critical thinking skills.
And that's a valuable lesson in any context.
It is, yeah. We're bombarded with information all the time these days.
We are.
So it's more important than ever to be able to think for ourselves.
Right, to question everything.
Exactly.
So even with all of these layers of complexity and uncertainty, Karen still seemed to benefit from the session.
Oh, yeah, she definitely did.
I mean, her phone cracked.
Right. That was pretty wild.
She thinks it was from the energy work.
Now, I don't know if I believe that, but
That's interesting.
it is. Yeah, and regardless of whether or not the phone cracking was real, she definitely felt a shift.
She did, yeah. She said she felt lighter, more at peace.
And I think that's what matters.
Yeah, it's about finding relief from whatever's been holding you back.
And sometimes that means facing some pretty uncomfortable truths.
It does. Yeah, this whole idea of entities and unseen forces, it can be pretty unsettling.
It can, but I think it's also incredibly empowering.
How so?
Because if we can understand these forces, we can start to take control of our own lives.
Instead of feeling like we're at their mercy.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming our power.
I like that. So as we wrap up this part of our conversation, what are some key takeaways for our listeners to ponder?
Well, one thing that really stuck with me is how we are all these energetic beings,
Right, and we're not just like these islands, we're all connected.
Yeah, exactly. And we're constantly interacting with this sea of energy around us.
And it's not just about like good vibes or bad vibes, it's more nuanced than that.
Oh, for sure. It's like a whole spectrum,
And we can be influenced by it, but we also contribute to it.
Right. We're both receivers and transmitters.
So like we were talking about earlier, if we're putting out a lot of negativity,
Mm-hmm.
we might be attracting more negativity back to us.
Exactly. And it's not just about entities either. It could be negative people, negative situations,
Right. So it's like we have a responsibility to be mindful of our own energy.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, being aware of what we're putting out into the world.
Okay, so bringing it back to Karen's session,
Mm-hmm.
that part where Grifasi helps her rewrite the past, that was pretty mind-blowing.
It was, wasn't it?
Like the idea that we can actually change the energy of past events.
Yeah. And potentially even change their impact on us in the present.
So it's not just about like positive thinking, it's more about shifting our perception.
Right. It's about going back and reframing those experiences, maybe even healing those old wounds.
So we're not just like stuck with the baggage of our past.
Exactly. We have more agency than we might realize.
And it made me think about something Grifasi said about entities not being destroyed, just shifted to another dimension.
Yeah. Where do they go? What happens to them there?
He doesn't really explain that in the video, does he?
No, he doesn't. But it definitely opens up some interesting questions.
It's like, what if there's this whole other ecosystem, this whole unseen world that we're just not privy to?
Right. And maybe these entities are part of it.
Maybe they serve some kind of purpose that we don't fully understand.
It's hard to say, but I think it's worth considering.
Yeah, because just because we don't understand something doesn't mean it's not important.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be open-minded.
Right, to not dismiss things just because they seem strange or far-fetched.
And to be willing to question our own assumptions.
Because there's always more to learn.
Always.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
what would you say are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is this idea that we are all energetic beings.
Right, and we're all connected.
Yeah, and our energy matters.
It affects us and it affects the world around us.
So we need to be mindful of what we're putting out there.
And if we're struggling with negative energy, there are ways to address it.
There are, yeah, whether it's through hypnotherapy or energy healing, or even just simple things like meditation and mindfulness.
And it's important to remember that we're not alone in this.
We're not. There's a whole community of people who are exploring these ideas and supporting each other.
So if you're curious, keep digging, keep asking questions.
And don't be afraid to dive deep.
Because the more we learn about ourselves and the nature of reality, the more empowered we become.
That's the truth.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of hypnotherapy and entity removal.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious.